A lone fighter drops out of the clouds over a small Czech town. Below, Red Army soldiers fill the streets. The war is over or close enough. A Soviet pilot is celebrating above the rooftops. He rolls his Yakovlev through barrel turns for the cheering crowd. Infantry clap from the cobblestones. Nobody is looking up. The Messerschmitt comes from the sun. It closes too fast for the Soviet pilot to react. 20 meters behind the Yakovlev, the German pilot fires. Cannon shells tear through the Soviet fighter's engine cowling. The Yak shudders, rolls, and spirals into a field trailing black smoke. It hits the ground and burns. The crowd goes silent. The German pilot banks west and disappears. He is 23 years old. That was his 352nd kill. No pilot in history has ever come close. And in a few hours, his own commanders will ground him for good, not because he failed, but because they can no longer afford to let him fly. His name was Erich Hartmann. The Soviets called him the Black Devil. His own men called him Bubi the Kid. This is the story of the deadliest fighter ace who ever lived, and why the men above him spent the last year of the war trying to pull him out of the sky before the enemy did. Erich Alfred Hartmann was born on April 19, 1922, in Weissach, a small town in southwestern Germany. His father was a country doctor. His mother was a pilot. Elisabeth Hartmann was one of Germany's first female glider pilots. She did not just fly, she ran her own gliding school in the town of Weil im Schenbuch. By the time her eldest son was 14, he was flying alongside her. By 17, he held a powered aircraft license and was instructing younger boys in the gliding program. Flying was the family language. When the Great Depression strangled Germany after the First World War, the Hartmann family moved to China. Erich's father found medical work in Changsha. Erich spent his early childhood there, a German doctor's son growing up on the other side of the world. In 1928, the Chinese Civil War forced them home. The boy returned to a country tearing itself apart. But in the air, above all of it, everything made sense. In the spring of 1940, at 18, Hartmann enlisted in the Luftwaffe. 2 years of flight training followed basic instruction, advanced aerobatics, gunnery school. His training officers noted his raw talent and tolerated his free-spirited attitude. In October 1942, he was posted to Jagdgeschwader 52 on the Eastern Front. JG 52 was the most decorated fighter wing in the Luftwaffe, home to aces who had already killed 100 or more. Hartmann was not decorated. He was a boy who looked younger than his 20 years, with blonde hair and a face that belonged in a schoolyard. The veterans looked at him and shook their heads. They called him Bubi the Kid. His first combat sortie was a catastrophe. On October 14, 1942, flying as wingman to the experienced Sergeant Edmund Rossmann, Hartmann spotted a formation of Soviet Il-2 ground attack aircraft. He broke formation. He dove at the enemy alone. He missed every shot he fired. He nearly collided with his target. He lost sight of Rossmann, got himself surrounded, ducked into a cloud bank, and ran his fuel tanks dry trying to find his way home. He crash-landed his Messerschmitt in open country. His commanding officer sentenced him to 3 days with the ground crew, servicing the planes of men who could actually fly them. Nobody expected anything from the kid. The Eastern Front had already swallowed hundreds of pilots just like him, young, eager, undertrained, and dead within a month. What happened next would take 3 years to unfold, and when it was over, no record book in aviation history would look the same. Hartmann's survival began with a man named Paul Rossmann. Rossmann was a veteran sergeant with an old arm injury that limited his mobility in the cockpit. He could not dogfight. A damaged arm made tight maneuvers impossible, the kind of high G turns that separated a good pilot from a dead one. So Rossmann hunted differently. He flew above the battle. He watched. He waited. Sometimes for 20 minutes, circling at altitude while the fight raged below. He picked a target that had separated from the pack the straggler, the one trailing smoke, the one whose pilot was looking the wrong way. Then he dove, fired a single burst, and climbed away before anyone knew he was there. Rossmann would finish the war with 93 kills and an intact body. Most of his peers could not say the same. Hartmann studied Rossmann the way a medical student studies a surgeon. he watched Walter Krupinski, another JG-52 ace, fire from 20 meters close enough to see rivets on the target. Krupinski was aggressive, reckless, brilliant. He would finish the war with 197 kills. He urged Hartmann to hold his fire until the target filled the entire gun sight, then fire once and break away. Alfred Grislowski, with 133 kills, taught Hartmann how to read a formation. Hermann Graf, with 202, taught him how to survive being outnumbered. Gerhard Barkhorn, who would become the second highest scoring ace in history with 301, taught him patience. JG-52 was a graduate school for killers, and Hartmann was its most attentive student. Something clicked. Hartmann took Rossmann's patience and married it to Krupinski's aggression. He distilled his method into 4 words that would define his entire career. See, decide, attack, reverse. He would stalk Soviet formations from altitude, sometimes circling for 20 minutes before committing to a dive. He would identify the most vulnerable aircraft, the straggler, the one flying too wide, the pilot whose attention had drifted. He would dive from the sun, closing to point-blank range 20 meters or less. Then he would fire a single short burst and immediately disengage, climbing away before anyone could react. No prolonged dogfight, no chasing, no heroics, just the cold arithmetic of ambush. 80% of his kills never knew he was there. On November 5, 1942, he drew blood for the first time an Il-2 Sturmovik, the armored Soviet ground attack plane that German soldiers on the ground called the Black Death. By the end of that year, he had 2 confirmed kills. It was not an impressive start. But Hartmann was not trying to be impressive. He was trying to survive long enough to get good. By July 1943, during the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history, Hartmann shot down 7 aircraft in a single day. The sky over Kursk was so dense with Soviet aircraft that a disciplined pilot with ammunition and nerve could kill all morning. Hartmann had both. By September 1943, he had 100 confirmed victories. That acceleration was not luck. It was a method being perfected in real time against an enemy that outnumbered him on every single sortie he flew. By early 1944, Hartmann's Messerschmitt had become unmistakable. He had painted a stylist Black Tulip across the nose cowling. It wrapped from the propeller spinner back along the engine cover in angular, jagged petals. Other German pilots thought it was decoration. The Soviets thought it was a warning. They were right. Soviet pilots learned to recognize the marking from distance. Radio chatter went out across entire formations. Karaya 1 is in the air. The Black Devil of the South. Break off. Do not engage. Stalin placed a bounty of 10,000 rubles on Hartmann's head. No one came to collect it. Soviet pilots did not flee from Luftwaffe fighters as a rule. By 1944, the Soviet Air Force had clawed its way to near parity with the Germans. Soviet pilots had learned to fight the Luftwaffe toe-to-toe over Stalingrad, over Kursk, over every burning city between Moscow and Berlin. But they fled from this one. Hartmann's fame created a problem he did not expect. The Tulip was killing his numbers. Formations scattered before he could close to firing range. His kill rate dropped not because he had lost his edge, but because the enemy refused to stay and fight. Hartmann's response was pure instinct. He gave his marked aircraft to new pilots, the rookies, the ones who needed protection most. Young men flew the Black Devil's plane, while Hartmann took an unmarked Messerschmitt. The Soviets would not touch the Tulip. The rookies flew in relative safety, shielded by a reputation that was not their own. And Hartmann, flying anonymous, tore through the formations that no longer knew where he was. On March 21, 1944, he had the Tulip painted over entirely. Over the next 2 months, flying a plain gray Bf-109, he shot down more than 50 aircraft. In January and February alone, despite being grounded by weather for nearly half that time, 50 Soviet planes fell to an aircraft nobody could identify. The man who terrified an entire air force had made himself invisible to do it more efficiently. But there was something the Black Tulip could not protect him from, and it was not the Soviets. Hartmann was never shot down by enemy fire. Not once in 4,104 combat missions. not once in 825 separate aerial engagements, but he crash-landed 16 times. The reason tells you everything about how close he flew. His method demanded point-blank range 20 meters or less. At that distance, when a target exploded, the debris came back at him. Engine parts, wing fragments, burning fuel. His own aircraft absorbed the wreckage of the planes he destroyed. Shrapnel buried itself in his wings. Oil coated his canopy until he could barely see the horizon. Metal fragments chewed through his engine cowling and tore holes in his fuselage. He flew home half-blind more than once, nursing a wounded Messerschmitt back to the nearest strip by feel and by prayer. On August 20th, 1943, debris from an Ilyushin Il-2 destroyed his engine over Soviet-held territory. He crash-landed behind enemy lines near Artemivsk. Soviet soldiers captured him within minutes. Hartmann faked a stomach injury, doubling over, groaning, clutching his abdomen. When his guards relaxed their attention, he bolted. He ran through open ground while Soviet soldiers fired at his back. He dove into a sunflower field, the tall stalks closing over him like a curtain. He lay flat in the dirt until nightfall. Then he walked west, navigating by the sound of German artillery until he crossed back into friendly territory. His crew chief, Heinz Mertens, had already taken a rifle and gone searching for him on foot. Mertens was the man who kept Hartmann's Messerschmitt running through the entire war, every mission, every forced landing, every flight through another plane's wreckage. He patched the holes, cleaned the oil, replaced the shattered parts, and had the aircraft ready again by morning. Without Mertens, the record does not exist. By October 29, 1943, Hartmann had 148 confirmed kills. He received the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. He was 21 years old, and the men running the Luftwaffe were beginning to realize they had a problem they had never faced before. They had a pilot who was too good to ground and too valuable to fly. By mid-1944, Erich Hartmann had surpassed 250 kills. He was the highest-scoring fighter pilot in the Luftwaffe. He had overtaken his JG-52 comrade, Gerhard Barkhorn, who would finish the war with 301 second in all of history. Between the two of them, they had destroyed 653 aircraft. The German High Command now faced a paradox. Hartmann was their greatest propaganda asset, proof that German skill still dominated the air even as their empire crumbled on every front. He was their most lethal weapon on the Eastern Front. And he was irreplaceable. There was no factory producing Erich Hartmanns. Every mission he flew risked losing the one pilot they could not afford to lose. In August 1944, Adolf Hitler summoned Hartmann to his headquarters. He pinned the diamonds to the Knight's Cross on the young pilot's chest. It was the highest military decoration the Third Reich could bestow. Only 27 men received it during the entire war. According to those present, Hitler spoke at length, railing against his own generals, convinced they were betraying him, then trying to bolster Hartmann's morale with promises of miracle weapons that would reverse everything. Hartmann had spent 2 years on the Eastern Front. He had seen what the war actually looked like from the cockpit. He knew the truth. The war was already lost. But the decorations kept coming because the alternative was admitting that no amount of individual brilliance could hold back the tide. The decision from high command was implicit but unmistakable. A man of this stature should be preserved, not risking death in a routine dogfight over collapsing territory. The risk was catastrophic. If Hartmann died, they lost their greatest ace, their morale symbol, and an intelligence asset who understood Soviet air tactics better than anyone alive. So the Luftwaffe brass ordered him transferred to the Me-262 jet program, Germany's revolutionary new weapon, and a posting that would remove him from frontline combat entirely. Hartmann refused. He lobbied his superiors. He argued. He pulled every connection he had. The transfer was canceled. He went back to JG-52 and kept flying his Bf-109 into the teeth of the Soviet Air Force. In March 1945, General Adolf Galland asked him a second time. Galland was forming Jagdgeschwader 44, an elite all-aces squadron flying the Me-262 in defense of Berlin. It was the most prestigious assignment a fighter pilot could receive. Hartmann turned it down again. His commanders were trapped between two impossible positions. Grounding him wasted the deadliest weapon they had. Flying him risked the one loss they could not absorb. But the question Hartmann's commanders were asking, can we keep him alive, was the wrong question. The real question was what this war was about to cost him that no decoration could replace. And that cost was already being paid, 1,000 kilometers away, by a woman named Ursula. Ursula Paich met Erich Hartmann at school in Korntal. He was 16, she was younger. He decided immediately that he would marry her. Their parents were not thrilled. They were teenagers in a country marching toward catastrophe. But Hartmann was the kind of man who made a decision and held it in the air and on the ground. He would wait for her through flight school, through combat training, through his first miserable winter on the Eastern Front. She would wait far longer. While Hartmann was shooting down Soviet fighters over the Caucasus, Ursula was writing him letters he carried in his flight suit. He wrote back to her from forward airstrips where the ground froze solid and fuel turned to slush in the tanks. He wrote to her every day of the war, every single day. On September 10, 1944, between missions, they married. His witnesses were Gerhard Barkhorn and Wilhelm Batz between them. 543 confirmed aerial kills. It may have been the deadliest wedding party in the history of aviation. The groom had just come from a meeting with Adolf Hitler. He was 22 years old, with over 300 kills and the highest decoration Germany could offer hanging around his neck. He married the girl from school. Within weeks, Hartmann was back in the cockpit. The Eastern Front was collapsing. He knew it. Ursula knew it. They did not talk about what would happen after. In 1945, while Hartmann flew his final missions over Czechoslovakia, Ursula gave birth to their first child, a boy named Erich Peter. Hartmann never held him. He did not know his son existed until months later. And by then, Erich Hartmann was in a place from which no decoration, no rank, and no record could bring him home. By late 1944, the arithmetic of the Eastern Front had turned lethal. The Luftwaffe was running out of fuel, pilots, and aircraft. The Soviet Air Force had none of those problems. For every Soviet plane Hartmann shot down, 100 more appeared from the east. The factories behind the Urals had been working 3 shifts a day for 3 years. The sky was inexhaustible. Hartmann's kill rate did not slow. It accelerated. He passed 250. He passed 275. On August 24, 1944, he shot down 11 aircraft in a single day. Soviet lags and American-made P-39 Airacobras and surpassed 300. He was the first pilot in history to reach that number. He was the only one who ever would. But the empire he fought for was dying around him. Airfields were overrun. Fuel was rationed to a handful of sorties per day. Young pilots arrived at JG-52 with 50 hours of training and were dead within a week. Hartmann had seen it before: the rotating cast of fresh faces in the ready room, the empty chairs at breakfast. The names no one bothered to learn, because learning them made it worse. The Luftwaffe was consuming its young. Hartmann took it on himself to keep them alive. He gave his marked aircraft to rookies so the Soviets would avoid them. He flew alongside new pilots, covering their mistakes the way Rossmann had once covered his. He never lost a wingman, not a single one, across the entire war. In an air force that was feeding its young into a furnace, that fact stands alone. In the final weeks, Hartmann encountered American P-51 Mustangs over Romania. He shoots down 7 of them, his only non-Soviet kills. The Western and Eastern fronts are converging. On one mission, he dives through a mixed formation of Americans and Soviets, firing at both. He kills a P-51 and a Boston bomber, then escapes at treetop level. Behind him, the Americans and Soviets, confused by the attack, turn on each other. The Cold War is being born in Hartmann's slipstream. He does not know it yet. He is flying missions with half a fuel tank and no guarantee of making it back to an airfield that still belongs to Germany. Some days the fuel allocation is so thin that he has 30 minutes before the gauge touches red. 30 minutes to find a target, kill it, and make it home. His commanders issue direct orders to limit his sorties, to stay above certain altitudes, to disengage at the first sign of trouble. He ignores every one of them. By April 17, 1945, his tally stood at 350. Germany had weeks to live. The deadliest pilot in history was still climbing into a cockpit every morning as if the numbers still counted for something. Perhaps they counted for him. Perhaps they were the only thing left that did. May 8, 1945, the war in Europe was ending. Hitler had been dead for more than a week. Over the Czech town of Brno, a Soviet pilot performed aerobatics for cheering Red Army troops below. He put his Yakovlev Yak-9 through rolls and dives and stalls while the soldiers applauded from the streets. It was a victory celebration. The war was won. A lone Messerschmitt dropped from the clouds. The German pilot fired from behind one burst, close range, the same method he had used 351 times before. The Yakovlev spiraled into the ground and burned. The stunned soldiers below could only watch. Kill number 352. Erich Hartmann landed for the last time. He learned that Germany had surrendered. He ordered his ground crew to destroy their remaining Messerschmitts, smash the instruments, drain the fuel, wreck the engines. He would not leave them for the Soviets. Then he led his men west, toward American lines. He surrendered to the U.S. 90th Infantry Division. Under the Yalta Agreements, units that had fought primarily against the Soviets were to be handed over to the Red Army. The Americans marched Hartmann and his men to an open-air compound to await transfer. The number of prisoners swelled to 50,000. Some American guards turned a blind eye to escapes. In some cases, they helped providing food and maps to men they knew were being sent to suffer. Then the Soviets arrived. The first thing they did was separate the German women and girls from the men. What followed was chaos. American guards tried to intervene but were driven back at gunpoint. Hartmann and his men were loaded onto trains heading east through Vienna, Budapest, across the Carpathian Mountains, through Ukraine, to Moscow, and finally to Kirov. The journey took weeks. The Soviets had been waiting for the Black Devil for a long time. The Soviets charged Erich Hartmann with war crimes. The charges were fabricated. He was accused of destroying 345 expensive Soviet aircraft as though fighting a war constituted a criminal act. He was accused of deliberately killing 780 civilians in the village of Bryansk. He was sentenced to 20 years. The sentence was later increased to 25. Hartmann refused to confess. They offered him command in the Soviet-backed East German Air Force. He refused. They put him in solitary confinement, a concrete cell, 4 feet by 9, bread and water, sleeping on a stone floor. He refused again. They asked him to spy on his fellow officers to become a stukach, a stool pigeon. He told them no. They threatened to kidnap his wife. He did not break. During an interrogation about the Me-262 jet fighter, a Soviet officer struck him across the face with a cane. Hartmann picked up a chair and knocked the officer unconscious. They did not try that approach again. He spent 10.5 years in Soviet prison camps and labor gulags. He was moved from camp to camp through Ukraine, to Moscow, to Kirov, deep into the Russian interior where the winters lasted 8 months and the guards had orders to make the prisoners useful or let them die. He endured forced labor, starvation rations, and isolation designed to break him. He refused to work. They put him back in solitary. He went on hunger strikes. They waited him out. Nothing they tried could make him cooperate. The Soviets kept one piece of information from him for as long as they could. His son, Erich Peter, born in 1945, died in 1948. He was 3 years old. Erich Hartmann never held him, never saw his face, never heard his voice. The boy lived and died entirely within the years his father spent behind Soviet wire. In 1955, Hartmann's mother wrote directly to West German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, begging for her son's release. A trade agreement between West Germany and the Soviet Union was negotiated. 16,000 German military personnel were sent home. Erich Hartmann was among the last. He walked out after 10.5 years. Ursula was waiting. She had never stopped writing to him. She had never remarried. She had waited the entire time. In 1957, they had a daughter, Ursula Isabel. In 1997, 4 years after Hartmann's death, the Russian Federation reviewed his case. The government admitted he had been wrongly convicted. They exonerated him of all charges. By then, Hartmann had been in the field for 3 years. The apology arrived to an empty chair. When Hartmann returned to West Germany, he did what the Soviets had tried to force him to do voluntarily. He re-entered military service. He joined the newly formed Bundeswehr and was given command of Jagdgeschwader 71 Richthofen, named for Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron himself. It was West Germany's first all-jet fighter squadron. He had the squadron's jets painted with the same Black Tulip marking he had flown in over Russia. A final gesture of defiance toward his former captors. The marking that had once made Soviet pilots flee was back in the air, this time on Canadair Sabres wearing West German insignia. Hartmann flew jets for 15 years. He was forced into retirement in 1970, not by age, but by his refusal to accept the Lockheed F-104 starfighter. He had flown the aircraft during training visits to America. He admired its speed. He knew its engine killed pilots. He said so, loudly and repeatedly, until his superiors retired him for it. The starfighter went on to crash 292 times in German service. 116 pilots died. Hartmann had been right. It cost him his career again. The man who refused to be grounded during the war was grounded in peacetime for telling the truth about a machine that was killing the men who flew it. The German press called the starfighter the Witwenmacher, the Widowmaker. Hartmann had tried to stop it. Nobody listened until the funeral started. After his military retirement, he became a civilian flight instructor. He flew aerobatics with his old comrade Adolf Galland, the same general who had twice tried to transfer him to the Me-262. Two old men, two of the most decorated pilots in history, looping through the sky above Germany as if the war had never happened. Perhaps, for a few minutes at a time, it hadn't. 352 confirmed aerial victories, 404 combat missions, 825 aerial engagements, never shot down by enemy fire, never lost a wingman. Gerhard Barkhorn, his JG-52 comrade and the second highest ace in history, finished with 301. Barkhorn survived the war, survived the peace, and died in 1983 in a car accident with his wife. The highest-scoring American ace, Richard Bong, finished with 4. Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, finished with 80. Hartmann's record stands 252 kills above the nearest man. Modern air combat precision missiles beyond visual range engagements, small professional air forces has made it impossible to break. It will stand forever. Erich Hartmann died on September 20th, 1993, in Wiel im Schenbuch. He was 71 years old. His wife Ursula died 3 years later. They are buried together in the town where his mother once taught him to fly. In 2016, his former unit JG-71 painted one of their Eurofighter Typhoons with the Black Tulip. 72 years after the marking first appeared on a Messerschmitt over Russia, it flew again. The Soviet pilots who fled from it are gone now. The men who pinned medals on his chest are gone. The son he never held is gone. The prison camps are rubble. But somewhere in an archive in Freiburg, there are 352 claim forms. Each one logged to a map grid reference. Each one was signed by a wingman. Each one recording the moment a boy from Weissack pressed the trigger at 20 meters and watched another aircraft come apart. He flew through the wreckage every time. Pieces of his kills embedded in his wings, oil on his canopy, metal in his engine. He always came back. Except from the war. Nobody comes back from the war. 352. A number that belongs to one man and will never belong to another. If this story landed the way we meant it to, stay with us. There are more stories like this one buried in archives, waiting in diaries, carried home by men and women who never told anyone what they saw. Subscribe so the next one finds you. Share this with someone who would sit with it the way you just did. And leave us a thought in the comments, we read them.